Where did you live during the time period 41 to 45?
For 41 to 45, we lived in Cortland, and we moved to Vienna to my granddad's farm when I was 7th grade, 13 years old. So that had been in 44. Ohio. I said Ohio.
What was the extent of your education to this point?
That's what I was. I'm from, let's see, 10 years old. I'd have been in 4th grade to 10th. Or, 4th grade to 7th at this time.
If you were in school during part or all of this period, what do you remember most about the experience? What did you...
I was in school at this time. I can remember. Let's see. I can remember when the war started. The Japanese. I can remember at the time we didn't have TV, and at night we used to gather at the radio. And if I remember correctly, 7 or 6:45, old Thomas would be on with the news. And I was at 7. And that's the way we found out what was going on. We'd gather around the radio in the evening after dinner and listen to the news, and that's why we kept up with it.
What was the name of your school? Describe a typical day.
I started out at Cortland, a typical day, pretty much like it is, I suppose, now. Started out with Mrs. Zeller's 1st grade in Cortland. Moved when we was in 7th grade to Vienna. The difference was between Cortland and Vienna, I would say how they dressed. Vienna was more of a farmer's area than what Cortland. Cortland was more a bedroom town. Typical day. Just study like we always did, that's all.
How did you get to school? And do you remember what types of food you ate for lunch?
How we get to school. In Cortland, when I went to Cortland, Ohio, at the school, we walked. Anybody who lived in the city limits walked. When we moved to Vienna, we were picked up by bus, lived on Road 82, a mile and 9/10 east of Vienna School, and we were picked up and brought home by the school bus. And for lunch, I think it used to cost us $0.25 to buy our lunch at the school. And days it was different. One day it'd be, let's see, be a hamburger and French fries, and milk was, if you wanted chocolate milk, was $0.05 for a carton. The next day, and each day would be different. We had cooks in the kitchen in the cafeteria. And what? Dried beef gravy, yeah. We had that quite often. Whatever we had, it was during the war, and had a lot of peanut butter. I remember that. And we had the older women doing the cooking in the kitchen, so that was pretty much it.
What did you think your options were when you graduated from high school?
When I graduated from high school, I was in 1949.
What did you think your options were?
My options were at that time either college, or at that time there was jobs like in the steel mill, the railroad. There was no real shortage of jobs. I mean, if you wanted to work, you could find a job. My granddad told me, and at that time the feeling was go to work if you wanted to work right out of high school, to be to like Republic or the steel mills or on the railroad, because the pay was good and it was a good retirement. And, I mean, if that's what you wanted to do. I ended up trying college the first year.
What were your feelings about the war as a student?
My feelings about the war as a student were most everybody that I know worked to help out with the drives we had. And well, first in the school we were taught in case of a raid to go to the halls, sit down, and stay away from the windows. So that kind of made you frightened. But then we'd have drives for tin. We'd go out into the fields, into the swamps, and collect milk pod, which at this time they used to put in the flotation gear that the people in the Navy wore. We had bond drives. We had went out and they used to sell stamps for the war stamps. We had paper drives. It was always something. We had, and everybody. I mean, it was nobody shirked their duty. Everybody would help. There wasn't anybody that, at that time that didn't help. There was no talk against the war, or being against the war. Everybody knew he was in it for the run, the long haul. And as the time went on, most of the young men in our area were gone. Then they, at the time, they rationed everything we used for to eat. They rationed like sugar, food. Meat. We used to have stamps for meat stamps. We had stamps for groceries. We had, if you wanted tires for your car, you had to go to the board and tell them the reason why. My dad at the time had 2 sawmills running, and we could. And then we moved to the farm. We could get gas, and we traded with other people to get. At that time, you couldn't buy Woolrich winterwear, or everything was rationed. Everything was going to the war effort. What else? At that time, to select the service, guys didn't want to get out of high school till they were drafted. We had a neighbor. My wife brought home, was killed in service. I think it was, the first week that he got there. And he was 19 years old, and he lived probably 2 miles from the farm. At that time, the funerals were held in the home, not in the funeral homes. We went to, you go to the wake and you go to the funeral at the home. Before we moved to Vienna, a good friend of my dad's was home on leave, and my brother and I was upstairs in bed at the time. By that time, I was probably 12 years old, so this has been like 43. He come up, tell us he was leaving. Good night. He was going back. He was a pilot on they flew a B-24 Liberator. And the only thing that come home from him was his ring. He got shot down over a raid in Pulaski. So there's quite a few neighbors that either come back wounded or were killed. They were killed in the war, and then all your neighbors would come to the wakes, and the kids that brought home. What was the rest of that question? While you're looking, at that time we had civil defense. They used to come around. They used to run these little mock raids where they wanted your lights out. We'd practice. It's blackouts. They had it seemed to me like at that time was all the old people were on the boards. There really wasn't many young people around.
Where were you on December 7th, 1941, the Pearl Harbor attacks?
70. Pearl Harbor attack. 41. I'd be at home in Cortland. At that time, I may have been in church. No, I'd been at home. I'd have been at home Sunday morning because I think we got to. Well, it happened about 8 o'clock over there, so it had to be. No, I wouldn't be in church. That'd be in the afternoon, wouldn't it? Well, I never was. I was home. That's about all I remember that.
Yeah, when and how did you hear about the attack?
Well, we heard about it over the radio. Everything come over the radio at that time. No TV. Very few people had shortwave. And then the next morning, it was all over the newspaper.
What was your understanding about the war previous to this day?
My understanding about the war previous to this day? Well, we knew Germany was into it since '39 because you listened to that, and we had demonstrations in this country. Some because there was people sympathetic towards Germany, and and then there was a lot of people that weren't. At that time, 10 years old, I didn't know anything about the Japanese. It was more about what was going on in Europe.
What were your feelings towards Germany, Japan, and Italy?
Well, as the war went on, and you heard more and more about what went on, and I got older, I could understand. Your feelings really hardened. You heard about these atrocities that they did, and then the movies. When you go, they had this. Lil Thomas had this 15-minute newscast on the movies. Cause that's how you did when I was young. That was about the only entertainment. You could see what was going on, and after the march of the soldiers in Bataan and Craigador and Bataan, and see what happened, and you really hardened towards the Japanese. That'd be about the way it was. And the longer the war lasts, the more you didn't like them.
What was your initial response to the news of Pearl Harbor? How did the next several days increase or decrease those feelings?
All we did was sit by the radio and listen for Franklin Delano Roosevelt to tell us what was going on, tell us we're going to war. People didn't know it was fighting, really. People didn't want to go to war. They tried to stay out of it. But the biggest thing was getting the news.
What did you do during the war years?
What did I do? Just was in school. I was on the farm. At that time, we moved from Cortland. I was on the farm, and at that time, with everybody gone, I was able to receive a farmer's license, a driver's license, when I was about 14 and a half years old, to drive on the road, to do farm work. And we did farm. In fact, my brother and I started when we was 13 years old, taking care of a 164-acre farm. So that pretty much took care of us during the war.
What is your most interesting story from this time period?
Most interesting story? Most interesting story. Well, there we go. Maybe it was the people themselves, because at the time, we never locked the door. You didn't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. People worked together in this war. Favorite thing would be, I think my favorite thing was when Daisy Haste sat on the edge of the bed and told me about flying airplanes. The worst thing was when they sent these guys home, and for the funerals. Like Eddie Croner, 19 years old. Neighbor was later in this. It was just right after the war was over. Come home. Burns had 2 or 3 tanks shot out from under him. And the first winter he was home, he's cutting wood, and the saw flew off, and he died at home after going through the war. Is that the question?
Yeah, what was your least favorite memory from this time period?
Well, them boys coming home, be one of them. Then the only thing we got, we'd go to the movies and see England getting destroyed by Germany from bombings. The Japanese were taking over the South Pacific at the first part of the war. You go by, and every window somebody went, there'd be golden stars, blue stars, or for the kids that were serving in the forces. I would suppose the worst time when they send these kids home.
Tell me about a day in your life at this time.
A day of my life?
Yeah.
It was a day of my life would consist of, we got up, we had a 165-acre farm. We started out with milk cows.
You mean now?
You mean then, right? The day of my life back in. We started out, we milked the first year. After that, we went into beef cattle and that. It was to go out and take care. If it was in school, we'd go to school and come home, do chores. In summertime, my brother and I would plow to fit, and my dad would help us at come time to plant. And he was busy this time because they take all the lumber they could to the steel mills to ship the steel and stuff out, and they needed the lumber to stack it with. Pretty much work. Pretty much work in a life. We did have sports to fall back on in school, but that was it.
You made pallets.
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
How did you feel about the war?
How did I feel about the war? It sure changed our lives. We had all young guys, and at that time, probably up into the 30s, were drafted. We had blackouts. We had civil defense. We had the constable would come around at night, and you had to have all your lights off. You're allowed one candle. He was allowed to arrest you and take you in if he did find lights. We had rationing. We had very little sugar. I mean, you couldn't bake. You couldn't get butter, coffee. Women couldn't buy hosiery, silk hosiery at that time. Gas was a big problem for most people. Tires, you couldn't even get tires for cars. You had to go up and beg at the board for, and you had books. And you had books with stamps in. You had books if you wanted to buy food. You had books if you wanted to buy gas. Every time you stopped and got gas, you had to rip a ticket out. And each ticket was worth so many gallons. Meat. If you knew somebody, being on a farm, we were pretty fortunate. But people lived in town, cities, very little meat they could get during the week. Very on weekends, the tickets didn't go very far. The women that were husband had gone to war. At that time, they started to work in the factories. I can remember later, as I got older, I worked for my dad. He ran a implement shop, sold Massey Ferguson's. The neighbor was over, and I walked in, and her name was Dorothy King. Her and her husband were a good friend of my dad's. And I'd been welding, and she walked over and picked a torch up and started to weld, and I blew my mind. I couldn't believe I could see a woman welding. And so when she got done playing around with where I had been, and she took it off and grinned, and I said, "Where in the heck did you learn to weld?" She welded during the war. She worked down in Warren on tanks. The women used to work, and that's when all these women, not all the women, but a lot of the younger women, there was not enough men in the factories, is when this women started this job programs, and after the war, a lot of them stayed there. So that's when the women really, up to that time, it was only men you could find working. But now, you see what it is now. There's as many women working as there are men. What was that question? What else? During the war?
Yeah, how did you feel about the war?
How did I feel about the war? Well, that changed our lives. Everything you could do on the farm, it went. You had no problem selling anything. A lot of people made money during the war, working the hours that they did. That was just right after the Depression. Anything else?
What specific sacrifices did you make for the war?
Well, we made, like I said, all the stamp, all the rationing. You used to go out, barn drives. You used to, well, pretty much. I don't know how much life had changed, but you did without a lot the 10 days. And then the sacrifices the neighbors made, like shut that thing off a minute.
We had white margarine.
Yeah.
Get the yellow packets and have
When they said Eddie Croner home, and you seen firsthand these guys that come home in boxes. That that took the whole township. I felt bad. It's like this war they got going now when they send people home. Kids would come, barefoot kids. That time it was hard to buy a pair of shoes. I mean, really. But being up and observing that firsthand, you grew up fast. Anything else? Well, what we seen in the movies, running at that time. The first part, England was getting blown off the map by the Germans, and that had to be the worst time. After that, when things changed and turned around and started going, that made you feel a heck of a lot better. That we finally got things turned around. And it was still. Every night you listen on the radio to Low Thomas to find out what was going on, because this news that you got in the paper would be days and days old. So that'd be the low spot.
Do you remember any of the drives to collect scrap tin or rubber?
I remember a lot of drives to collect stuff. We used to have at that time, people would come around the farm and pick stuff up, any kind of scrap you had. Tin, yes, going to school, and then what else we didn't have scrap? Well, like I said, we'd go out and collect these stuff for putting these soldiers' flotation units, the milkweed. We had paper drives that, my God, we had in school. We had paper piled everywhere. We'd have drills in school. People were alert. People knew what was going on. But everybody pulled in this war for, it wasn't like the Vietnam War,
Together.
where one half of the people didn't like the war and half, involved all these scuffles during the cities and marches, and everybody was together.
How did the people in your community adapt or not adapt to the demands of war?
I just went through it. I thought,
okay, good.
well, they adapted. Everybody was friends in them days. Everybody was neighbors. Everybody pulled together. Things went well. You could leave your house and you didn't even shut the doors, and you didn't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. It's not like it is today. Today you don't even turn your back on your neighbors, let alone leave their doors open.
Last question on this one was, what types of things did you do for fun? Do you remember like the fireside chats with Franklin Roosevelt or any specific arrangement?
Well, that was one of them. When I was young, when I was born, till almost graduated from school, the only man I ever remember was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because he was fourth termer, but he died in his fourth term as president. But we grew up and we listened to him. We listened to him all during the war. He really was. He was the only guy, that I really remember as well as I do. And music. What about music?
Fun thing.
I'm telling you, we used to have fun, because when we get done working on the farm, and then you neighbored. We neighbored with Charlie Ziddick, and we do our thrashing, and we thrash. And thrashing the grain, we thrash the wheat, we thrash the oats. And in fact, Jill and I would go out and we cut the oats with a binder and stalk, pick them up and put them in sacks. And the thrash machine would come in, and that's when we worked together. We helped the neighbor, they helped us thrash and put the grain away. But after we got done, I can remember being sweaty in that. The guys my age and brother and that were up on Warner Road. We used to have a place called Clark's Bridge, and we'd go swimming. And in them days, that's one of the things we did for fun. And we'd go swimming. We also would go to movies in them times. And that time, you could go to Youngstown or Warren. And then that's just like being there at home. You could leave your car parked, and you had nothing to worry about. You walk down the street, you didn't have to worry about getting mugged. You go to Warren, it'd be the same way. Picture shows at that time were 10 or 15 cents to get in. Then we always had reunions. Or generally we had, like the government reunion. And that was interesting. We'd all the relatives you haven't seen or I didn't know. That time being young, I thought a lot of them were old. So it was mostly family affair, and we used to do a little hunting. We did like hunting. So, and at that time we had bird dogs, and we had a lot of pheasants. So I really did like to bird hunt. And in '44 they built the airport in Vienna. And that was kind of interesting. When you go up and when they got done, they let you go up and run over and we used to sit out and I watched. They brought in a lot of planes during the war. With land, you see military aircraft coming in and out. So that'd give you something to do on a Sunday. You could go up and watch the planes. Did give you something to do. I mean, you couldn't afford gas anyway.
Did you remember what types of comics books you read? Did you buy comic books?
Comic books. My friend Ray Cook in Cortland And I still, even after I moved to Vienna, we plowed around quite a bit. In fact, in '49, him and I went to college together. And he had an attic full of every comic book I believe was ever made or ever printed. I would sure like to have them today, because I noticed there'd have to be some of them. It had to be something worth money, because he had the first Superman at that time, Batman, whatever else there was. His dad was a doctor, so they had, I would guess, more money than we did at one time. And he was, his dad kept him in a lot of nice stuff. And then he got a little older. The place to go to around here was like Yankee Lake. They had a ballroom. And then on weekends, Idora Park was, it did attract, like 10, 12,000 people on a weekend. We go down, I'd seen the Homestead Raceway down there, a black ball team, the Monarchs, another black ball team. I'd seen Louis Prima, one-time world's champion heavyweight boxer, put on a wrestling show at Idora Park. It was one of the more entertaining places, and they had big bands there, and at Yankee Lake, people would dance. I believe they called one the Hippodrome. Sammy K, College of Music Knowledge. Who else? Yeah, you're taking me back years and years. Oh yeah, Glenn Miller. I think another guy like Lyra was there. Oh my. And then at that one time I had a singer named Von Moreau, and he come through the airport, and at that time you'd hear him and you think how nice he is and that, but he wouldn't even sign autographs. I mean, I don't even know whether he was at Idora Park or if he was in Yankee Lake, but the women loved him. They loved him. He's like Frank Sinatra when he started. They'd swoon over you, and that was the activities in that day. It was all family oriented, and the theaters. It's not like now. What other things did you do for fun?
What other things did you do?
What other things did I do for fun? Well, I can remember we lived a mile 9/10 east of the center of the school, and 13, 14, 15 went in there during the war. We, my brother and I, we belonged to the YMCA in Warren, and if on a Saturday I could take 50 cents and he could take 50 cents, we could catch the Warren Sharon bus, Warren, Ohio to Sharon, Pennsylvania, and ran every hour. We could go out, have a fun drive, and they'd stop for you. We could get on, it cost a dime a piece. We'd go to Warren, we'd go to YMCA, we would swim and do whatever we were doing. We'd come out, and when we come out of the YMCA, it's still in Warren, Ohio where it was, and it's been remodeled quite a few times. But right next to the YMCA was the Harris Warren, the theater, and right down the street was the Look, and on over one street on Market Street in Warren was the Daniels, and was the theater and the Robbins Theater. That time we could get in for like 15 cents. So we could go and for a dime, and we could go to the theater. It cost us 15, so we spent a quarter. So then we could go and have a milkshake. So now we spent 35 cents. So then we go back and get on the bus and spend another dime, and catch the bus and go home back to Vienna. So we could spend all the better part of Saturday, if we had time, on less than 50 cents, taking a movie, and go to Warren, taking a movie, go to the YMCA, and come home and still have change left out, 50 cents. So that was one of the better times. That, in 14 or 15, we was fortunate enough to have 2 cars, and I lived on the east side of Vienna. So everything that happened at the school, I was like almost a small bus myself. All the kids on the east side that I knew, I would take to school functions and drop. Nobody drove. Parents went nowhere in them days with gas rationing and stuff. But fortunately, being on a farm, my dad working in a sawmill, we were lucky enough to have enough gas, we could get around. So that was one of the better times that, we used to have. That's it.
Were you married, dating? Where would you and your date partner go for a night out?
Let's see. Well, at that time, if I was dating, it'd be a carload, and so you couldn't hardly call it dating. Friend of mine and I called his Apple, and his dad ran a slaughter business, and they had a little bit of money, and we weren't rich, but we had enough of it, we could have a little extra, and we had 2 cars, and they had a car and a pickup truck. So anything that went on, especially at school, we'd have certain events at school, and then we had sports which we played, but we had the events. Well, him and I would haul most of the students that we knew on the east side of Vienna, and we had a couple of friends, had a car and pick up the rest, and then we'd all go. So we had friends, with girls, but nothing what you call real serious. We'd go, and after that we'd go to Handy Andy's in McKinley Heights. It was a place where all the high school kids would hang out, and we'd go down there, and at that time, just go down there and BS a little bit, and maybe milkshake and a hamburger, and that, and what was the question again?
Where would you go for a night out?
Yeah, where did I go for a night out? There wasn't that many, but we 422 had a skating rink, the Highway Arena. A lot of kids like to skate. There's a lot of good skaters. I never really got that good at it, but it was kind of fun. It was a different night out. Then we had the white teens. It was in the high school where it was clubs, and I can remember we used to meet at Cruise. They had a swimming pool. It was just different social functions more in them days. Then we at the school we had Dwayne Butler, was a friend of my dad's parents. He's a farmer. And we used to do a lot of square dancing in them days. We'd go to the school and he'd come up. My God, he called square dances from at Vienna School, but for 40 years. It was a lot of fun. It didn't take much money, and we had a good time.
Do you remember the music you listened to?
The music I listened to. I remember the music I listened to at home, because when I was young, my dad would play a button accordion and a mouth organ, and the neighbor would play a guitar, and another neighbor would play a guitar, and if I remember right, one played a fiddle. So about the only thing I listened to at home when he was home was the barn dance, hillbilly music, country music as is now, but that was in the late 30s, early 40s, and then we got into Frank Sinatra had come on, and that was a girl's heart throb. But like I said, we used to have Sammy Kaye and them would come into Dora Park or over at Yankee Run. We had Von Monroe. Music I listened to, I liked. I went to a few operettas, which was kind of interesting. My aunt was more interested in that kind of music, which I found was was kind of nice. Other kind of music. We put an operetta on in the high school. I got to be in an operetta. Now I got to try to remember what the heck it was. It's
HMS Pinafore.
HMS Pinafore. I am an Englishman. I am an Englishman. Oh my God, that's 50. How many years ago? 50. That was in 40. 46? 47? A good thing my wife was there because I wouldn't even remember the name of it. Had a good time though. I mean, it was interesting. We had the whole gym was packed. They come out to see it. I remember Mr. Laurie was a music director at Trimble County. I said, man, he even come out to see it. I said, man, this must be important. Them guys come out. It was nothing great, but it was good. We had a good time doing it. That was more the kind of entertainment we had in those days. Not like now, get in a car and drive 100 miles and go swimming somewhere, or drive another 100 miles to see something, or go to a pros basketball game or a pro football game. Them days we didn't have that, but we had fun.
You remember any specific movies you went and saw?
Movies?
Yeah, name.
Sure, I can remember. I can remember when Gone with the Wind. That was in '39. Well, the war started because Germany had already went into Poland. For a long time, they was trying to find it was advertising for a girl to play a part and be an actress in that. Then they finally come out with Gone with the Wind. That was one of the first colored, and mostly with my dad, we went and seen Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, Tex Ritter. Oh God, there was more. Buck Jones. Guy's horse, Tom Mix. So you can see it was pretty much a diet of cowboy pictures, but then we would go. In those days we used to have bank night, and you could win a prize at the theater. They'd stop, and then the lights would come up, and somebody would play the piano. And you had a certain numbers, and you could win a prize. I can't remember the amount of money that you win at the theater, but it draw crowds. It packed the Robin Theater and the Daniels at Warren. I can remember it used to be between one and the other. I think evidently both them theaters were owned by one person. Tuesday night. I can remember walking down the sidewalk, going there, and we got kind of a little bit of a habit going there. But I don't know if anybody I knew ever won anything. That's pretty much what we did. The first house or second house?
You knew Richard. You
didn't
know Ed.
Well, I didn't know Ed. Sound like I did. I'm lying about it.
Did you remember anything about the war over in Japan?
Remember anything about the war in Japan? Yeah, I can remember. We used to listen every night. on the radio. And man, there for a while it sounded bad. They went down and they took the islands of the Pacific, and they finally ended up at Corregidor. Then they had that march where they lost so many men. So right away you had a hatred for them people. So the war for the first year or so really went bad. Then they finally got us turned around and Guadalcanal and went back. And every night you listen to the news, you listen to the news, and they kept jumping these islands from island to island and bypassing, and they finally got to Iwo Jima. And from what you read and what you see, you recognize, how hard a fight that was. And you also recognize, we've seen that pictures of that flag, it come out, but it's still, that's all you see anymore when they raise the flags over that, what was it, Matsurabatsi? Yeah, you can remember. And to this day, then they went ahead. Then they put, if I remember right, General LeMay was the head of the bombers there, the B-29s. They started bombing Japan, and this was in 45. And they finally dropped the atomic bomb. And hell, we didn't know what it was. It was a surprise to everybody. But they said when they killed over 100,000 people, it had to be terrible. And then they wanted the Japanese to surrender. And they waited, I think, if I remember right, 3 days. Then they dropped another one, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the war ended, shortly after that. I mean, they couldn't stand up. Then we seen, that time, General MacArthur was a hero down there. Then you watch him on the battleship Missouri. And they signed the papers and that. That time, that was all come back, and you could watch it on the movies, all this. And then a friend of my dad come home, and he never talked about it too much, but one day they were talking about it, and they was sitting there and they was drinking a little bit of homemade wine, and a friend started talking about he was a soldier and fought in the South Pacific, and the story he told about where he was, man, scared the hell out of me. He was talking about how he got down there at night. You crawled down in your foxhole, and he said you get shot from either side. You never stuck your head up. And he's telling how good the Japanese soldiers were, and a few of the stories they told you, I wouldn't even want to repeat. But that time, people developed it. Towards Japanese, there was a hell of a hatred for what's done, and it took a long time, to get over that. But you look back and they followed Truman. For a lot of people said there's pros and cons about dropping that atomic bomb. But it did end the war and saved a lot of lives on our side. So, I'm still all for it. So, that's my feelings on it.
Do you remember where you were when you first heard the war had ended?
First heard the war ended. Well, I heard the war ended. He was on the farm, and I can't remember what he was doing. But I remember running out the next day, and the paper, it was this thick. The war, VJ Day, victory in Japan. I was home on a farm. That's where I was, in Vienna. People were going crazy. They were nuts, I was over. There's no more loss of lives. Didn't have to go on more of these didn't have to go and see any more of our neighbors that brought home in a box.
Since many people who were not around during this war might read or see parts of this interview, what would you like people to remember about the war and about yourself?
What would I like the people to remember about the war? Well, I think the only thing I can say, you grew up fast. At least we did. We did a man's work when we were like 14 years old. That's when women broke free of the home, started working in the mills, and I've never quit since. That's another part of the war. I would think at that time this whole country was like had one common interest, and was to defeat the enemy. It was never split like it is now. The attitude in this country was, we'll be there, we'll finish it, and they'll come home. And that's what they did. Remember about me? I just kind of lived through it, and then I observed it as a kid, and then in high school. So that's the only thing I can add to it.
What college did you go to? You kept talking about college. What college did you end up
I tried to go to Allegheny. I ended up in Youngstown for a semester, and I worked for my dad because when I was graduated from school, he was in '49. He was going to a friend's place to drill some post holes in Vienna. And it was a Saturday afternoon, and he was driving the tractor, and he's about a half a mile east of Vienna. And boy, it was a year ahead of me in school, ran into the back of him, and he had a pickup truck with 2 dogs he was taking to the veterinary, and he threw my dad off the tractor and crushed his back, and he was a paraplegic. And that was in '49. In the year '49, I started to college. And the first year I can remember, they didn't think he'd live 24 hours. And then they didn't think he'd live 48. And he's still on the farm. So I went to the college, and I went to Youngstown because it was closer. And then the first year I can remember, he's in the hospital for, I don't know, almost 2 months. And they'd went through $25,000 the first year. So that one of the reasons why I didn't go back. Only be one thing I think is, if we could change, it's too bad we couldn't be interviewing the man behind me, Lee Barnes, served in a 101 Airborne. He was a paratrooper. He fought through the Battle of the Stone, and he never would say very much about it. But he's interviewer's grandfather and my grandson's grandfather. And people like him's not here really should be doing this. Oh, just one thing. They did go visit. They took the grandkids, my daughter and my wife. They did make a trip to England, and they ended up to Reading Air Base. And they did happen to get to go through it and tour it and see the barracks, where he stayed, and then where he slept and where he was stationed at when he was in England. Then he was in Bastogne when the Germans broke through, and that's why we see the Purple Heart behind me. He died in what year?
2001.
2001, and but he's one of the heroes of that war. So it's just too bad he's not here to be telling us.